Fantastic. Well, last time we had a pretty good introductory lecture and we talked about the meaning of philosophy, and we can use the term philosophy simply to mean our worldview, and there's nothing wrong with that. But more specifically, philosophy is a method of systematic conceptual investigation. And so it's a way that we think about the world. It's a way that we approach the world. It doesn't guarantee that we will know the ultimate truth or how the world actually is, but I think it can be very, very helpful in some circumstances. It is a systematic method of investigation like science, although unlike science, philosophy does not rely exclusively on empirical observation, and that is both a strength and a weakness. It is a strength in the sense that philosophers can talk about things that scientists cannot, but it is a weakness in the sense that we have no methodology as philosophers to understand when we are wrong. In science, you can understand that there's a problem with your theory immediately, because when you test that theory, you will make observations that don't fit into the framework of the theory, and you know you have a problem. Philosophers do not have that methodological tool. And so what happens often, I think, is that some philosophical theories stick around way after their expiration date. But on the other hand, I mean, think of all the things that we talk about that aren't even in principle observable. Let me just give you an example: subjectivity. And this is a problem with the study of consciousness. Consciousness entails the subjective perspective. Science is about objective facts that are universal. And so this poses a problem for science when science begins to think about the subjective perspective of consciousness and qualia and experience and all of that. And so philosophers have had a great deal to say about the problem of consciousness. And that, I think, is helpful to science. And that's not even, bringing up things like God or supernatural beings or things like that, simply are outside of the realm of the observable. I mean, at least according to most people, right? So philosophy is a way of approaching the world, of understanding the world, and it's something that we do. And I asked you to put on your philosopher's hat while you're in this class. I don't want you to abandon your values or your ideas or any of that stuff, but while you're in this class, it's essential that you formulate justifications for your opinions, that you have good reasons for what you believe, because again, philosophy is based on, or primarily based on logic and reasoning, right? So that's where we are. It's also important in philosophy to have an open mind and not to get caught with in the trap of the confirmation bias, not to begin with a conclusion and then reason towards that conclusion, but look at the evidence, look at the data, and then as objectively as we can. And I know that pure objectivity probably is an impossibility, but if we make an effort to be open-minded and objective about evaluating the evidence, then we come to conclusions on the basis of the evidence. Now, I contend this will be helpful in your life. You may not want to structure your life like this, but if you do, you will avoid a lot of pitfalls, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there are a lot of people who are trying to sell things to you and manipulate you. And philosophy is a good defense against that. Ask yourself the question: is this plausible? Understanding what we understand about the world, is this claim plausible? Is it probable? What is the likelihood that this claim is true objectively? Because people will play on your emotions and you'll want to believe that things are true. And we'll see this with the Sagan reading today. When people claim that they can contact your dead relatives, man, that would be great. Just the idea that we can exist, we can have some post-mortem existence, that our personality would continue, and that we can contact our loved ones, the people that we have been deprived of. Wow, I would like to believe that that is true. However, I'm going to have to see the evidence for that. I'm going to have to see a lot of evidence for that, because from my experience and what I know, when things die, they die. And so if you're going to tell me that you're in contact with my dead relatives, I'm interested and I'm open to that possibility, but you have a lot of work to do. You're going to have to show me the evidence, and not simply play on my emotions. Right? And that's what philosophy is all about. Or one of the things that philosophy is all about. Now, today we're going to be talking about this great reading. We're going to do a couple things. We're going to do some, I'm going to give you, I told you I'd give you like a toolbox. I'm going to give you some concepts that you could use, some basic logical concepts that you can use in your life to kind of self-defense. We think of this as a self-defense class. What are we defending ourselves against? Manipulation, BS, baloney, all the stuff that's the misinformation that's out there. How can you defend yourself? So I'm going to give you some basic concepts. And we're going to begin with a general discussion of our larger philosophical worldview in terms of naturalism or supernaturalism. And so let's talk about our values. Now, why can't we just agree on our basic values, what's important to us and what matters in life? And you would think, because all human beings are in the same existential situation, we all suffer, we all are trying to survive, we all need the same kind of things, we all worry about dying. You would think there'd be more commonality about values. And to a certain extent, there is. I mean, there are some values that all human beings share, and we'll talk about those when we talk about ethics. But a lot of times when we engage in these conversations, it seems like we're just talking past each other. Like we inhabit radically different worlds. Like what is real to me you have, like, the words that I'm using just go right past you. Or you're talking about something and I can't relate to it at all. Why does that happen? Why can't I make other people see what is important to me? Sometimes we can, but sometimes there's a gulf there. And maybe I can help explain that a little bit, because we all live in the same world, but we inhabit different worldviews. So objectively, we live in the same world. I mean, that's the same phenomena. We have the same existential, challenges. We have, that everything, nomologically, everything is out there. It's the same for all of us. But our internal worlds are different. Sometimes radically different. The things that we believe are real can be radically different. Right? So the objective world is the objective world. The real world is out there. But because our understanding of that world is not complete, and it's not complete because of our cognitive limitations, our sensory limitations, all the kind of things that we will talk about in epistemology, we can't really get to experience as it actually is. And that's going to be a major topic for this class, how we're kind of trapped in our own subjective perspective. Even though there is an objective world, it's hard to get there from where we are. So our beliefs about how the world works can be radically different. And in fact, we can categorize basic worldviews into 3 different categories. Actually, I would argue 2 different categories, but we'll consider 3. So there are 3 basic philosophical approaches we can take when thinking about life, reality, and the nature of existence. And we don't do this consciously. We just come to these worldviews, or we're raised in these worldviews uncritically. And this is just a way that we think about the world. So there's naturalism, there's supernaturalism, and then there's nihilism. Now, I would argue that nihilism isn't actually an alternative, but we'll get there when we get there. So I would kind of bifurcate the entire world, this entire question into, there are people who are naturalists and there are people who are supernaturalists. Maybe there are real nihilists out there, but we'll get to that when we get to that. So this goes back to our conversation about the origins of Western philosophy. And remember, we talked about the distinction between the logos and the mythos. And just in case you don't remember that, both logos and mythos are Greek words for story, but a logos is a story that is in principle true or false. It's a factual claim about the world. It's a descriptive claim. And a mythos just does not have any criteria of evaluation such that we could say the mythos was true or the mythos was false. A mythos is a kind of story. It's a way that we interpret and understand the world. It's based on intuition, revelation, something like that, art, insight. A novel is a mythos, right? So another way to look at this distinction is to say, okay, the mythos is rooted in a worldview, and the logos is rooted in a worldview. The mythos is rooted in a worldview where gods exist, supernatural entities exist, that there's a world beyond our perception and our understanding, that we live in a physical world, but there's something beyond the physical world that we experience, and that is real. Now, the logos says, wait a minute, the only thing that is real is what we can see, what we can observe, what we can interact with. And so this brings up these two different worldviews, naturalism versus supernaturalism. So let's look at naturalism first. This is, by the way, the minority view in our country, at least, and around the world. Naturalism says the world is entirely material, entirely physical, and ultimately quantifiable and understandable. We can only know what we experience. Knowledge about the world comes from the senses, the scientific method, reason, logic, everything. If you want to ask what the world is, it's quarks, it's leptons, it's muons, photons, neutrinos, maybe strings. It's matter and it's energy, right? It's matter and it's energy. That's it. Now, we don't have a complete physics. We don't understand the physical world completely, but maybe one day we will. Maybe one day we will have a complete physics that explains every phenomena, including consciousness. So everything that we experience is material. Everything that we experience is reducible, in fact. Maybe consciousness is an emergent property of underlying neuronal activity, but ultimately it reduces or depends on physical things, material things. So this is naturalism. This is philosophical naturalism. The world is ultimately mechanical. Okay. Now, you're probably already thinking about the implications of this view, right? If the world ultimately is mechanical, then everything that we experience is we are machines, very complicated machines, but the world operates according to physical laws, thermodynamics, right? Conservation of energy, entropy, all of that. That dictates everything that is real. Okay. Now, this is not the only way to look at the world. There's also supernaturalism. The supernaturalist says, another word for this is transcendentalism, which means to go beyond. So the supernaturalist says, hey, yeah, the material world is real for sure, but it's not all that exists. There is a non-material world that cannot be perceived by the senses, obviously, because the senses are attuned to the material world, are attuned to physics. This non-material world is not subject to the laws of nature, is not subject to entropy, is not subject to any physical laws as we understand them. We can't have direct knowledge of the supernatural world because it transcends our senses, our ability to understand, but it's real, it's there, and it affects us. Well, how do we know? And this depends on who you ask. It could be we can't have direct knowledge from experience, but we can have knowledge from faith. We can have knowledge from intuition, mystical revelation. And if we think historically, right, the angel Gabriel appears to Muhammad in the cave and writes the holy surahs on his heart, or Moses sees the burning bush. Joseph Smith sees the angel Moroni. These are all examples of human beings coming into contact with the supernatural directly. And, this is revelation. So what is the supernatural world like? Well, it depends on who you ask. Maybe it's a realm of jinn or gods or demons. But these things are real and they affect us. Okay. So naturalism versus supernaturalism. And I hope that you can see already, if you're rooted in a supernatural worldview or you're rooted in a naturalistic worldview, this is why we talk past each other, because some concepts just don't make sense to us. If I'm a naturalist and you start talking about spiritual entities, I tune out. What are you talking about? Right. And if you're a supernaturalist and I'm a naturalist, you're probably appalled that I don't understand the immanence of the spiritual world and its effect on human beings or the soul or whatever you're talking about. Now, before we go any further, I am not going to advocate for either of these views. I don't care what view you have, but you should understand like where you're coming from. Doesn't matter to me. I'm just laying it out there for you. So, we've already talked about an example of supernaturalism, and that was Hesiod. Hesiod gives us this wonderful story. It's a way to understand the world. It's a way to understand why we are here, how the world came to be like it is, and it's a story about gods. Gaia, Mother Earth, Uranos, the sky god, and Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage between Mother Earth and the sky god, and the progeny of that relationship. Wow, what a story. And there's a castration and a birth of a fertility goddess. Oh, everything you could want in one paragraph. How exciting is that? But this is not a naturalistic explanation, is it? This is not based on observation of the natural world. This is based on divine revelation. And the ancient Greeks actually personify this in the muses. There are 12 muses, and the muses give us divine inspiration and help the poets articulate a view. Now, the Greeks are sophisticated. If you went back to Athens and said, what do you think of this Hesiod guy? I think very few people would say, oh, that's a direct account of creation. They aren't literalists. They'd say Hesiod is a poet. And yes, poets are inspired by the gods, but the gods don't necessarily tell us, every detail of how things work. They give us a picture, and it's up to us to figure it out on our own. And the Greeks would have been perfectly okay with that type of explanation. Um, there are literalists today who look at text or point to text and say that these texts are literally true or false. And I think that's one way of understanding them, but I think that can be problematic in many ways. Also told you the story of Thales. Thales wasn't buying this at all. He was like, yeah, maybe there's gods, maybe there aren't. Don't know, can't know. But where we should start is with observation and experience, and we should draw inferences and conclusions from the evidence at hand. Now, Thales is not a scientist. He's a philosopher because science doesn't exist. And science really probably doesn't exist in its contemporary sense until Bacon with the novum organum, right? And the idea that you have to test your theory and all of that stuff. So this is proto-science at best. But it's a lot different than waiting for the muses to inspire you. If we want to know about the world, we have to go out and interact with the world and learn about the world, right? So that's a different approach. And yes, this is a Western philosophy and science will come from this eventually. Not only Thales, we have Heraclitus, we have Democritus, we have Pythagoras, we have all kinds of these pre-Socratic philosophers who are thinking about what is the world really about. And this is a different approach. The world is physical, the world is material. And we can use reason to understand the world and experiment. Now, what about the third worldview I told you? And this is the view of nihilism. Nihilism is the view that our values and beliefs are mere opinions that have no basis in reality and that human existence is ultimately meaningless. Nihilism claims that we have no genuine knowledge of the way things are, nor of how humans should live. Now, okay, I don't think that's a legitimate worldview. I think there are people who say this. I've never met anyone who actually believes it. But maybe there are people. I mean, I will have people in a college class identify as nihilists, but if you really sort out their lives, they don't live in this way. I don't think anyone, I mean, maybe if you're a complete sociopath or something, you can do this. And it is certainly is possible to have extreme skepticism and say something like, knowledge is, we can't really know much. But you'd still have to organize your life. You still have to get by. You still have to interact with people and stuff. This would be very difficult to do. I'm not completely discounting the possibility that there are nihilists out there. There are certainly people who identify as nihilists. But I am not convinced. I mean, maybe you disagree. That's fine. This would be a very hard way to go. Now, both naturalist and supernaturalist reject nihilism, but they reject it for different reasons, of course. Supernaturalist, for the supernaturalist, the most important aspect of human beings would be the mind or the soul. And both the mind and the soul participate in the transcendent supernatural world. Life is meaningful because our lives do not end with death, but share in eternity. We're eternal beings. Naturalists reject nihilism because our lives can be fulfilling and meaningful insofar as we choose to make our lives meaningful, right? Even if we know we're going to die. And if you're a naturalist, what happens when you die? Well, your body, decays and the brain dies and the personality dies. Well, is that the end of the world? No, because we can choose to give our life meaning. We can make our life meaningful and purposeful. That's a choice that we make. And our human nature makes that the way that the brain is structured and the way that we think makes that possible. That's a possibility for us to lead a meaningful life. I can look at the legacy that I leave, or my children, or the impact that I've made on this world, and I can say, yeah, I had a good life. So, what is your philosophical attitude? Well, we could find out. We could find out. You may say, Professor, I've never really thought about this, but it's pretty easy to determine, and we can do it in the following way. Is the world completely physical? Do all things, does everything ultimately reduce to material properties, matter and energy? You say yes, you're a naturalist. Yeah, I mean, that's it. That's all there is. The stuff around us is all there is, folks. There's no secret world. There's no Hogwarts. There's no magic. I mean, there's magic in the sense that the world is fascinating and that matter turns out to be much more complex than we thought it was. But there's just matter. Is there a God, an all good, all powerful creator and ruler of the universe? Yes. Supernaturalist. That's not something that we experience in the natural world. I mean, there are religion. There's a lot of different religious views. There's a lot of theistic views that, I mean, Spinoza thought that the entire cosmos was God. Okay, so you could be a naturalist like Spinoza and believe in God. So the whole universe, the culmination of the universe, the totality of the universe is God. Okay, but that's not God in the traditional sense that people use, that most people have thought about God. And by the way, the idea of God as omnipotent and omniscient and omnibenevolent, that's a relatively recent idea, certainly is a post-biblical idea, right? God has almost always been instantiated in a body, uh, and no matter where you're looking at. But I mean, in our contemporary notion of God, certainly is that God is an all-powerful, all-good creator and ruler of the universe. And there's a certain logic to that culminates in this idea of God is infinite or omniscient and omnipotent and omnibenevolent. We'll have some interesting conversations about that. Do we have a mind or are we just a brain? That's a great question, isn't it? What is consciousness? Is it something separate from the neural framework that supports it? And I think most people, neuroscientists and philosophers, would agree that even if consciousness is an emergent property that is itself non-physical, it is completely dependent on having an intact brain. But there are many people who would argue that whatever consciousness is, our subjective awareness, or however we define that, and it's a problematic concept to define, don't get me wrong, whatever it is, ultimately it reduces to a material substrate, right? So the use of the word mind is not defensible. There's only brain. Now there are people who would say no, the mind is eternal. The mind is not connected to the physical. Descartes, we're going to look at Descartes in epistemology, and Descartes is going to say, I think, and thoughts, ideas are not material. They are not extended in space, and they are not subject to the vicissitudes of physical laws. And this is an interesting idea, but it's a problematic idea. Are we mind and spirit? Are we body and spirit? Are we body and mind? Are we just body? Is there a self? What is the self? Is the self the soul? the soul in its most fully developed sense begins with Plato as a kind of separate rational entity that is the seat of thought. Before that, we have, the nephesh, or we have this suke, or we have the soul is like the breath, the thing that animates it. But the modern idea of the soul that like manifests in Descartes as well with the mind is this idea of a separate entity that is us, our personality, our thoughts, the self, right? Is that real? Is there a stable, coherent self that persists over time? Or is the self an illusion, like the Buddhists say? And of course, we have the doctrine of anatta, which says ultimately there is no self. Do our lives have meaning even if there is no God or life beyond death? Many theists would say no, that God gives our life meaning. And if we die, if we come to an end, that's it. That's it. There's no possible meaning. That's meaninglessness, absurdity. So what gives our life meaning is that we exist beyond death. And ultimately that is rooted in the existence of a God that cares for us. Naturalists would say, look, this is what we get. This is what we get. We get what we get. And it's kind of greedy to ask for more, isn't it? I mean, you get what you get, and it's up to you to make the most of it. And you have to figure it out. Like Viktor Frankl says, and Viktor Frankl was not necessarily a naturalist, but Viktor Frankl says, look, it is not, you shouldn't ask the universe the question, what is the meaning of life? That's a question the universe asks of you. You have to figure that out. So do we have a spirit or soul? Is life after death possible? Again, if you say yes, you're a supernaturalist. The one exception to this would be physical resurrection, which is a theistic doctrine in some religions. And in fact, in the majority of religions, this whole thing, again, is a Greek idea. It really goes back to Plato, but there's an idea that if God is all powerful, omnipotent, that God can physically resurrect believers or everybody on the day of judgment out of the grave. Now, that's an interesting idea. Again, it's a problematic idea. And it is also predicated on supernaturalism to the degree that God must exist to perform that miracle. Okay, so do you know what you are? If you are like most Americans, you are a supernaturalist, and most people in the world. End of story. Unless you're from Scandinavia or other places in Europe. I think it's in the high 70% of Americans believe in that there's some type of God. Even if they're not religious, there are many people who identify as spiritual and do believe that there's a supernatural realm. So if you're a naturalist, you are in a very small minority of people. Right? And again, I'm not picking sides here, and I don't care what you are, but that's just a fact. Right? Yeah. All right. So we all clear on this distinction? We know what we're talking about? When I refer to it, are you guys okay with this? Can I move on? Because I'm going to talk about a related concept when we do science and when we do philosophy. I'm going to talk about a method of approaching investigation. So I'm going to talk now about methodological naturalism. Now, this is not the philosophical commitment that all things are material. It is simply It is simply a starting point for investigation. Whenever we perform an investigation, whenever we ask a question about some phenomena that we're observing in science or philosophy, we must begin with the assumption that the phenomena that we're observing is naturalistic in nature and not supernatural. So in science and philosophy, we must begin any investigation with the assumption that the phenomena that we're looking at is governed by natural law and in principle understandable and predictable. Now, can anybody tell me why we have to begin an investigation with that assumption?
Could be
Uh,
wrong.
I would say it would have to do with the fact that we're supposed to investigate based on evidence first. And
Right. And what is this if we're looking like let's say we're observing something, why can't we start with the assumption that whatever we're observing is a miracle? Because a miracle is an exception to the laws of nature. There's no way to understand that rationally. Or whatever we're looking at is magical, right? Was there somebody else that wanted to chime in there?
Yeah, we could be wrong, right?
And we could be wrong, yeah. And it's hard to be wrong about things that are supernatural. So here's the thing. Even if magic was real, and let's imagine that we live in Harry Potter's world where magic is real. Magic is by definition a non-causal exception to the laws of nature. Otherwise, it wouldn't be magic. You see what I'm saying? If something is magic, that I mean, there's no law that governs that. There's no predictability that governs that. This, by the way, is a problem if you're going to write a novel about wizards. Because if magic works predictably and there's a system and there's an order to it, then it's not magic. It's just stuff that happens in nature. Do you guys see that? So if something is supernatural, or if it has a supernatural cause or a magical cause, it's an exception to the rules of nature. It's not explainable. It's not testable because it won't happen again. Miracles don't happen twice, right? So events that occur through miraculous or supernatural causation would simply be impossible to investigate in a coherent manner. Because there's no pattern, there's no predictability. Now, does this mean magic isn't real? No. It just means that we assume that whatever we're looking at is not magical or supernatural in nature. So, methodological naturalism is the assumption that all causes are naturalistic, which means that they can be measured, quantified, studied, and understood. This doesn't rule out supernatural explanations. It doesn't. But we should exhaust all possibilities before we consult the wizard. Maybe we get to the wizard eventually. It's possible. Folks, I don't know that magic isn't real, but I'm not going to start with a wizard, right? We don't look at something and go, oh, maybe it's miraculous. End of story. No, we try to figure out what's going on. You do this anyway. You do this in your this is not radical. This is not you do this. You do this already. Let me give you an example. Your car breaks down. What do you do? What do you do when your car breaks down?
Pop the hood and look in the
Why do you do that? Why don't you perform some kind of occultic ritual?
I would call AAA.
You call AAA. Is AAA going to send a wizard?
A tow truck, probably a mechanic who can help me out.
Probably a mechanic, right? Yeah. We don't consult witch doctors or astrologers when our car breaks down. Why? Because we assume that whatever is wrong with the car has a naturalistic explanation. Now, look, here's the thing. Am I saying that astrologers and witch doctors and wizards are never net? No, I'm not saying that. Maybe there's a situation in which you do need to call the astrologer or the wizard. Maybe. But your car breaking down is not one of those, is not one of those examples. So we use methodological naturalism to explain what's going on with our car. We assume it's mechanical in nature. Abby, hi.
Hi. I had a bit of a question. Way back when there was a time where if anything happened, they would consult something like a doc or like a witch doctor or
Absolutely.
something.
Yes. Yes.
So what happened? What shifted that kind of
Yeah.
ideology?
Yes. What a great question as what shifted, because there's a limit to that, the explanatory power of supernatural explanations, right? Because they tend not to have practical applications. It's more useful to see patterns and to see connections to those patterns that are justifiable by empirical evidence, because then you can know when your theory is wrong. And again, this doesn't happen until pretty late in human history. But once it does happen, once people begin to make the connection that, oh, evidence can give us theories and theories can help us predict and control nature, civilization really takes off. Right? Yeah. Prior to that, it was kind of just hit and miss. And yes, people did look to the supernatural to explain ordinary phenomena. And that has limitations. That has real limitations, Abby. And it can't compete. Once you have a framework in place for scientific investigation, it's like that old style of simply performing a ritual or making a human sacrifice that just can't compete with what science can produce in most areas. Now, again, there still are limitations to science such that science cannot address, certain questions that are important to people, like, why are we here? And how should we organize our life, and what is important to us, and things like that. But in a lot of human life, science has turned out to be very, very useful, such as combating disease, things like that, fixing cars, or engineering cars. Did that answer your question, Abby?
Yes, thank you so much.
Fantastic. Okay, so in philosophy, we have a criteria for knowledge. And that criteria is that not to know something, not just have an opinion, but to know something. Like, what does it mean to know something? Everybody has an opinion. What is the distinction between having an opinion and having knowledge? Well, philosophers have an answer for that. It's not a perfect answer, by the way. And please believe me when I tell you that when I give you these things and I say this is what philosophers argue about these things all the time. Okay? And it's the same way in science. And again, if you're a naturalist or you're somebody who values philosophical or scientific investigation, you probably have given up the quest for certainty because these disciplines don't give us absolute 100% certainty when they're doing anything. And we'll talk about why that is in a minute. So, in philosophy, there is a definition for knowledge. Knowledge is justified true belief. Knowledge equals justified true belief. Now, to have knowledge, I must believe something. Step one. What I believe must actually be true. Now, here's the thing. I may have an opinion that turns out to be true. That does not mean I have knowledge. I may have an opinion, a belief about something that is actually true. That does not mean, in philosophical terms, that I have knowledge. I don't have knowledge unless I have good reasons or evidence to believe what I believe. That's the difference between an opinion and knowledge. Knowledge has to be earned. It has to be justified. I have to have good reasons. I have to have strong evidence for my opinion. And that's just how philosophy works. I can't be right accidentally. I have to show you how I came to my opinion, and I have to show you how I came to my conclusion and the evidence that I'm using, and that evidence has to be convincing. And only then can I say I have knowledge. Now, there is a problem with this because I can have justification for one of my beliefs, but it turns out my belief isn't actually true. So yeah, there is a problem with this definition. But I'm just trying to explain to you how philosophers approach the criteria for knowledge, and most philosophers would say it's not good enough to simply believe that something is true, and it is true. You must have good reasons for that position. Okay, everybody understand that? Here's a story. It's a story of the businessman's wife. A businessman has been kidnapped. Oh my God. This is the wrong climate to tell that story in, because I don't think that most people would even care today. It's not. There's a lot of stuff going on today, and some stuff that's really surprising to me. But a businessman, a CEO of a healthcare company, has been kidnapped. Oh, I'm not supporting that view. I'm just saying a lot of that is happening out there, right? A businessman has been kidnapped. His wife has a dream in which she sees her husband being held in a warehouse down by the river. She has a dream. At the same time, the police have been gathering evidence, interviewing suspects, tracing the car used in the kidnapping, looking at closed circuit television video, and questioning witnesses. The police come to the conclusion, on the basis of the evidence, that the businessman is being held in an abandoned warehouse close to the water. They break into the warehouse and they rescue the businessman. Now, here's the interesting thing about this story. Both the wife and the police detectives were right. Did they both have knowledge?
No.
Alexa, tell me why or why not.
the wife didn't have knowledge because it was basically her opinion. She didn't have any physical evidence to back up her claim, as opposed to the police, in which they have evidence, they were tracking it, and they have witnesses. Which
Yeah.
so that is what differentiates the both, I
Yes.
believe.
Yeah, I think that's a very good analysis. But an objection here would be maybe dreams are a reliable source of knowledge. And so we have to evaluate the question, are dreams a reliable source of knowledge? And almost all of you will have the experience, and correct me if I'm wrong, of having a dream and maybe part of that dream manifesting in reality. Like you have a dream of seeing an old friend, and then 2 or 3 days later, you see that old friend. Wow. Is that evidence that dreams are a reliable source of knowledge? What do you guys think?
Does that depend on whether you're naturalistic or like
Well, it
supernatural?
may, but I would say no. I think we can evaluate this objectively, regardless of if we're a supernaturalist or a naturalist. So we have to ask the question, are dreams a reliable source of knowledge? And so it does actually turn out that sometimes our dreams come true in some way. But there's another question we should ask, right? Does anyone see it? If we want to know if dreams are reliable, there's another question we should ask. And it's not the question, how often do our dreams come true? It's the question, anybody see it? How often do we have a dream and it doesn't come true? How many of you have ever had a dream that did not come true?
All the time.
Exactly.
It's kind of like a confirmation bias, sort of.
It is a confirmation bias, and it works like this. We count the hits, we ignore the misses. And that is a type of confirmation bias. Exactly, Emily. So you're like, everybody has the experience of having a dream come true, but that is very rare, extraordinarily rare, but you remember it. You don't remember the thousands and thousands of dreams that you've had that are just random nonsense. So when it comes to the question, are dreams a reliable source of knowledge? Yeah, it would be helpful to have some kind of explanatory hypothesis of how this could even be true, but we don't even need to get there because it turns out that dreams are terrible. It's like a broken clock. A broken clock will tell the correct time twice a day. But generally it's wrong. It is not a reliable source of knowledge. So here, we can comfortably say, I think, that the woman may have been right, but she was unjustified in her belief. She did not have knowledge. Does everybody follow that? Does everybody get that? Okay, fantastic. I got a thumbs up there. Okay, some basic conceptual tools for you guys. The logic toolkit here. So, a couple things. We start with the Sagan reading, the reading by Carl Sagan, The Fine Art of Baloney Detection. And this is a great reading. And Carl Sagan, just a fantastic mind. He was an astrophysicist. He was a popularizer of science. He was a very critical thinker, and I admire him greatly. When I was a young man, there was a television series called Cosmos, and Carl Sagan narrated the series, and it really lit a fire for my interest in science and cosmology and all of that stuff. Sagan tells the story of Ramtha. Who is Ramtha? Ramtha is a 35,000-year-old spirit who is channeled through a person named J.Z. Knight. Now, this is pretty amazing. There are a lot of implications with this story. And if somebody claims to be channeling an entity that is 35,000 years old, that is extraordinarily interesting. Imagine the implications of this. Not only do we have an eyewitness account of prehistory, and that is extraordinarily interesting, that we can ask any question we want to about somebody who was there in the Paleolithic period, when we were hunter-gatherers, right? I mean, this dates back to the time of the the cave paintings and let's call cave paintings and all of this stuff. Wow, an eyewitness. But the implication is that this spirit can transcend physical death, and that is an amazing claim. I'm very interested because I, not surprisingly to you, maybe, don't want to die. I really don't. I'm not looking forward to that at all. And it's something I worry about, right? Because I'm really enjoying this life. And the possibility that, I could go on for 35,000 years and as a spirit, interesting to me. Now, could Ramtha be 35,000 or 32,000 years old? Well, possibly, I guess. There's a lot about the world I don't know. There's a lot about the world we don't understand. But this is an extraordinary claim. In fact, it's a claim that undermines almost everything that we know about physics and chemistry and biochemistry. And so, if you're going to overturn all that established knowledge, we're going to need to see a great deal of evidence in support of this claim. Does everybody agree with that? Yeah. It'd be great if we could talk with people who are dead. I mean, that would be astounding. And I'm certainly open to that possibility. But again, this is an extraordinary claim because everything that we know in our experience says when something dies, it's gone. It doesn't come back. Nobody comes back. I mean, yes, there are accounts of people on an operating table who see things. I'm saying like 3 months after grandma dies or 6 months after grandma dies, does grandma ever come back and say, this is where I was? No. And there have been a lot of people who have died. So if they were going to come back, there's a lot of opportunity for that. So here, this claim is extraordinary. And I'm interested. But if it were true, it would completely overturn almost everything we know about physics and biology. How can we know if this is true? What kind of evidence would be necessary to support this claim? Persuasive evidence, and a lot of it. So do we get any of that from J.Z. Knight? Answer, Sagan says, absolutely no. J.Z. Knight fails to answer even basic questions that would be supportive of her claim, right? Like, where did you live? Why do you speak English? What was the climate like? What did you eat? What were the indigenous language that you spoke? What was the social structure, the life cycle, infant mortality rate, life expectancy? Did you have birth control? What clothes did you wear? How were the clothes manufactured? What were the most dangerous predators, hunting, fishing implements? right? Endemic sexism, xenophobia, and ethnocentrism. What was that about? Chasing Night gives us nothing. Now, Sagan says we are predisposed to believe this claim because we want it to be true. And Sagan warns us that if we want something to be true, we can be easily manipulated. And I think he has a point. I don't want to die. I am sad that people that I loved have passed on, and I desperately want to see them again. But that emotional connection to people who have passed on makes me vulnerable to manipulation, doesn't it? If I want something to be true, maybe I lower the threshold of evidence that I'm willing to accept. And you see, this, like Alexis said, this, or Emily said, this gets back to confirmation bias, starting with a conclusion and then looking for evidence to support that conclusion. Now, I know some of you are thinking, wait, what about that guy who talks to dead people? A lot of people do make this claim, right? And it is possible that it is true, but it is more likely that it's not true. And I'll tell you why. Because it turns out it's not really difficult to do what these people do. I could show any of you how to do a cold reading, a cold psychic reading with a crowd of people. You can do this as a party trick. Gather a group of friends and tell them you can, or strangers, and tell them you can make contact with their dead relatives. And you start by making a really vague claim, like I'm seeing the letter M, or I see a red door. Now, somebody is going to respond to that. And they're going to give you information like my dead husband's name was Mike, or there was a red door on the house where I grew up. And then once you have that hook, you can run with it. And the subject will give you all the information that you need. They'll nod and they'll smile when you get close to something. And if you get something wrong, you can simply backtrack and reframe the conversation in a more general way, or remind the subject that the spirit world doesn't always communicate with us clearly. So in light of the fact that anyone can do this, is it more likely that these people are actually talking to the dead, or they have convinced themselves and their followers of something that is not true? I'll let you decide. Now, am I saying, let's be real clear, that all mediums and psychics are frauds? No, I am not saying that. I am not. How would I know? I can't know that. Maybe there is a spirit world. Maybe we can communicate with the dead. Maybe. But if somebody makes this kind of claim, they should have extraordinarily strong evidence, particularly if the claim is something that we all want to believe. And I gave you the Shermer reading, and Shermer goes through a pretty good checklist of clear thinking and checking out evidence and information. And I would encourage you guys to read through that.